Since it's clear that whatever Peter Strzok did was sufficient to have him relieved, something that in the ordinary course of simply communicating a political opinion would not cause that and would be inappropriate to relieve somebody simply for having a political opinion, will you make available to this committee, upon the chairman's obvious request, the ability to see any or all of those 10,000 texts sufficient to understand why this individual was dismissed and how it might be relevant to the question of the objectivity of Director Comey's investigation and conclusions?
Well, there's a couple parts to your question, if I might. First, I want to be clear that the individual in question has not been dismissed. Or
he's not been
what
dismissed,
happened was,
but he's been relieved from the duties he had, and he's now in HR,
he was reassigned away from the special counsel investigation, which is different than disciplinary action. Second, as to the question of access to the text messages, we'd be happy to try to work with the committee on that. I want to be sensitive to the fact that there is an active, very active, outside independent investigation by the Inspector General, and the last thing I want to do, and I think the last thing this committee would want to do, would somehow compromise or interfere with that. So we'll have to go through a process to assess how we can be sensitive to those operational considerations, while at the same time, as we should be responsive to Congress and this committee and its oversight responsibility.
Would the gentleman yield on that?
Of course I'd yield to Chairman.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. We have been in communication with the Inspector General. We very much respect the investigation that is taking place there. And we have asked the Department of Justice and through them the Federal Bureau of Investigation for all of the 1.2 million documents that have been provided to the Inspector General, minus those that relate to any particular ongoing grand jury investigation. Now, I have received back from the Assistant Attorney General, Mr. Boyd, a letter indicating that they will make a fulsome response to that request. So I would like, in following up with Mr. Ice's question, to hear you tell us that you will also provide us with that honoring of that fulsome request, because most of those documents that the department has committed to provide are coming from the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Certainly, I don't mean to suggest that we wouldn't be fully responsive and cooperative with the committee. I'm simply saying that we would work with the Justice Department in making sure that we have considered all the appropriate factors that we need to make sure that we're not doing something on the in terms of unintended consequences with ongoing investigations, but we have no desire to frustrate the very legitimate oversight requests of this committee.
Would the chairman yield for a moment?
Yes, I yield to the gentleman.
Thank you. I just want to ask the director if can this kind or does this kind of document request of the Inspector General on an ongoing investigation, could it interfere with that investigation? Is it proper to respond fulsomely? I mean, what are the limitations here?
Well, I think a lot of that requires, as the chairman referenced, us to make sure that we are touching base with the Inspector General, since it's his investigation and not ours. If the Inspector General is comfortable with the information being provided and that it's not going to interfere with or impede his investigation, then that's one very, very significant consideration that can be put to the side. So I can commit that our staff will work with the Justice Department staff and your staff to make sure that we're doing everything we possibly can to be responsive, while at the same time making sure that we're not in some way jeopardizing or compromising an ongoing investigation or revealing something about a grand jury matter or anything like that.
We asked for it minus grand jury material. Obviously, it takes some time to do that. Mr. Boyd committed to a date of January 15, and he's going to require your cooperation. So we want to have your assurance that that cooperation in meeting that date will be forthcoming. We intend to follow up with further letters on clarifying this, but it's very important that we have this information very quickly. The Inspector General is completely cooperative with us in his investigation, but they're not his documents. They are the FBI and the Department of Justice documents, so the request is not directed to him, it's directed to the department, and we need to have full response.
We intend to be fully cooperative with both this committee and the Inspector General.
I robbed the gentleman from California of a bit of his time, so I'm going to...
I have to say I yield back.
I'll be brief, Mr. Chairman.
Yield it to you, but the gentleman's recognized for an additional minute.
Thank you. Director, at this time, as far as you know, you're not asserting or believe there's any privilege as to those documents. Is that correct?
Well, I haven't reviewed the however many million documents that...
I'm only saying that you, at this time, you know of no privilege.
I'm not aware of it, but I really haven't asked the question yet, to be honest.
Okay, I appreciate that. And then, lastly, since in the case of Peter Strzok and other statements, because this information was not made available to us at a time in which your predecessor, Mr. Comey, specifically said he was breaking precedent and being open and transparent as to the investigation of Hillary Clinton's taking from government possession documents under the Federal Records Act and classified documents. Do you agree that a de novo review at some point by someone is clearly warranted as to whether or not the decision not to prosecute was appropriate?
Well, Congressman, I think what I would say to that is there is what I would consider a de novo outside independent review by the Inspector General into whether or not decisions made, including charging or not charging decisions in the matter that you're referring to, were based on any kind of improper considerations or political considerations. And depending on what the Inspector General finds, there could be any range of possible steps that we or others would have to take in response to those findings.
So it's not a de novo review by the Inspector General, but a review of whether or not impropriety occurred, and as such, a de novo review of that decision not to prosecute Hillary Clinton would be the question.
The time of the gentleman has expired.
I think
Director may answer the question.
Yeah, I think I can briefly respond, which is I think of the Inspector General's investigation as de novo in one sense, which is that it's objective, arm's length, no skin in the game, if you will. But you're right that the Inspector General is not second-guessing prosecutorial decisions and things like that. However, the Inspector General is looking at the very important question of whether or not improper political considerations factored into the decision-making. If he were to conclude that that's what happened, then I think at that point we're in a situation where we have to assess what else might need to be done to unring that bell, if you will.
Thank you. I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman. I welcome you, Director, and I thank you for your service. I'm holding in my hand right now the mission of the FBI, which reads, the mission of the FBI is to protect and defend the United States against terrorists and foreign intelligence threats, to uphold and enforce the criminal laws of the United States, and to provide leadership and criminal justice services to federal, state, municipal, and international agencies and partners, and to perform these responsibilities in a manner that is responsive to the needs of the public and is faithful to the Constitution of the United States. Do you adhere to that mission?
Yes, ma'am.
Does that mission include your responding to the political bias and comments of politicians?
I do not think it is part of my responsibility to respond to opinions and biases, if they are out there, by politicians.
And forgive me for the time period that I have. If Director Comey made a statement that there would be no prosecution against the former Secretary of State, would that statement have been reviewed by the Department of Justice?
Well, Congresswoman, I think how that whole decision-making was handled is part of what the Inspector General is looking at.
Is that the protocol? You indicated that you report to the Deputy Attorney General, he reports to the Attorney General. And so in the normal protocol, a statement that you would have made or any other FBI director would have made, Director Mueller, when he was the FBI director, reviewed by that protocol? Is that the likely protocol?
Likely protocol, sure.
Let me move on to indicate that it was stated earlier that the FBI, that the former secretary disclosed top secrets into emails, and asked the question whether that should be investigated. The present president disclosed top secret classified information to Russian ambassador and foreign minister in the Oval Office. Is the FBI investigating those disclosures?
Congresswoman, I wouldn't confirm or suggest the existence of any ongoing investigation.
Just a few years ago, this committee considered and eventually moved on a obstruction of justice element in an impeachment proceeding. Do you believe, yes or no, can a sitting president commit obstruction of justice?
Congresswoman, legal questions, especially legal questions regarding impeachment, are not something that I'm equipped to answer in this setting as an FBI director.
This is separate and apart from impeachment. Do you believe that a sitting president can commit an obstruction of justice?
That also is a legal question, and I would defer to the lawyers on that one. I'm a now reformed lawyer as an FBI
I understand.
director.
Is it your opinion that if a sitting president commits a crime, then it becomes a non-crime?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
If a sitting president commits a crime, does it become a non-crime?
Same answer.
Let me move on to the idea of the quote from the President of the United States. And do you believe that the FBI's reputation is in tatters? What impact did that have on the FBI? And if you would move quickly, I know you gave a long assessment, but what impact would that have on the FBI if that is a statement made nationally and also to the world, that the FBI is in tatters?
Congresswoman, the agents, analysts, and staff of the FBI are big boys and girls. We understand that we will take criticism from all corners, and we're accustomed to that. I believe, personally, based on what I've seen, that our reputation with our counterparts in law enforcement, federal, state, and local, our counterparts in the intelligence community, our counterparts around the world, the communities that we serve, the victims that we protect, the judges we appear before, the scientists we interact with in the laboratory services space, for example.
I have another
My experience has been that our reputation is quite good.
Thank you very much. I want to be assured to the American people that Andrew Weissman and Peter Strzok, who were removed from their posts, that will not sabotage Bob Mueller's investigation to Trump campaign's collusion with Russia. Their removal.
I'm sorry.
That their removal, Peter Strzok and Mr. Weissman, will not sabotage Mueller's investigation into Russian collusion. Their removal from the investigation.
I'm not aware of any effort by anyone to sabotage or less even Special Counsel Mueller's investigation.
Let me ask the question on the black identity extremists. You indicated, or we have had some conversations. Let me indicate to you that a report that was done August 14, 2017, said that during the same period of this report, they found that right-wing extremists were behind nearly twice as many incidents, 115, and just over a third of these incidents were foiled than those who might be considered Islamists or might be considered others. There is a black extremist identity report. Again, I ask the question, would you see that report be clarified, and would you take note of the fact that the convictions dealing with violence are more for looking for my chart, are more dealing with Islamists and left wing and less for right wing. So right wing extremists are not being prosecuted. Black identity extremists, as declared by the FBI, are in fact subjected to a report, and if I might say, a FBI that is not diverse, that I know that we would like to work on to make it diverse, but they are not being prosecuted the way right wing. Right wing has the lowest amount of prosecutions in the United States. Percent of domestic terror incidents involving federal prosecution, the right wing is the lowest. The left wing is prosecuted 100%. Can you explain that?
The time of the gentlewoman has expired. The director is permitted to answer the question.
Congresswoman, I'd have to look at the statistics that you saw. I can tell you that we have in our domestic terrorism program, that last time I looked, we have about 50% more white supremacist, what the category that we would call white supremacist investigations than we do in the black identity extremist category. The other point I would make is that in all of these contexts, in the domestic terrorism arena, that we only investigate if there are three things. One, federal criminal activity, credible evidence of a federal crime. Two, credible information suggesting an attempt to use force or violence. and 3, those things in furtherance of a political or social goal. We don't have that. We don't investigate. It doesn't matter whether right wing, left wing, or any other wing.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'd like a report back on that question, please. Thank you very much.
The gentleman from Iowa, Mr. King, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Director, for your testimony here today and your service to our country. Number of curiosities I come here with this morning, as all of us do, and one of them is that in the FBI interview and investigation of General Flynn, are there notes from those interviews? Do you know?
Number one, I don't know, but beyond that, I wouldn't want to comment on a ongoing investigation being run by the special counsel.
And in a normal circumstance like that, would you expect there to be notes in any other case?
It is our normal practice to memorialize interviews.
And do so by notes?
Well, it usually gets reflected in an FBI, what's called an FBI 302, how agents go from the process of the spoken conversation to the 302 varies, and then there are other settings where it's a different kind of format.
But when agents set someone down for that kind of interview, notes would be normal. In most cases, would there also be an audio tape recorded?
Actually, I think an audio tape would be unusual.
Or a videotape would fit that same
Likewise,
category.
also unusual.
Thank you. And but you don't know whether they are available for General Flynn. I bring this up because of the interview of Hillary Clinton, and when we interviewed some of the members of the former administration that were familiar with the interview, the matter. We'll use their word in the, let's call it now, the investigation of Hillary Clinton. And we learned here in this room that there were no notes available to us, that there were no audio and no video available to us. And in fact, they had not been made available to the Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, and neither had they been made available or at least reviewed by former Director Comey. And it was curious to me that a heavy decision of one of the highest investigations in the history of this country, the people that made the decision on it didn't review the materials. They just simply received the briefing of the people that they had appointed to do the investigation. I guess I'll ask you, you're going to tell me you don't have an opinion on that. Would you conduct the similar investigations in a similar manner? Wouldn't that send off an alarm bell to you if that were going on within your department today?
Well, I think what I would say is that I think investigations are best conducted by taking appropriate memorialization of an interview. What I will also say is that in the particular investigation, I think your question goes to whether or not the handling of the investigation was skewed or tainted in some way by improper political considerations. And I think that's what the outside Inspector General is looking at, and I'm looking forward to seeing what he finds.
And I believe that the question has already been asked about the principals that were in the room during that investigation, and one is counsel, and at the same time being a subject of the investigation. I'll pass that along and put some more information out here before this committee. In October of 2015, President Obama referenced the lack of intent on the part of Hillary Clinton that she wouldn't jeopardize national security and never intend to do so. That was October of 2015. April of 2016, he made a similar statement. That Hillary Clinton was an outstanding Secretary of State. She would never intentionally put America in any kind of a jeopardy. We also notice that the language has been moved from extreme carelessness, or excuse me, from gross negligence to extreme carelessness. That carelessness was also language that President Obama used in his public discussions of the matter. Now, I'm going to make the point here that it looks to me that the get-out-of-jail-free card that Hillary Clinton received is rooted clear back in Barack Obama and his introduction of the word intent or lack of intent as a requirement for 18 U.S.C. 793F. And that's been brought up here. And so I'd ask you again, surely you've examined the definition and the distinction between extreme carelessness and also extreme carelessness and the gross negligence that's within the statute. You really going to tell us today that you don't have an opinion on that distinction?
Gross negligence is the language in the statute, I believe. But I believe also that almost anybody who grabbed a thesaurus would say that gross negligence and extremely careless are pretty darn close to each other. I will also say that whether or not the handling, including the handling of the statement that Director Comey issued, is exactly what the Inspector General is investigating, and I think, as he should, it's better that the FBI not investigate itself on this, and I think that's what the Inspector General is doing. So that would be my response to that question.
Okay, and I thank you, and it does do a clarification to your earlier response, and I appreciate that. I'd like to follow up with this, that there's a report that there are investigations going on 27 potential leakers within the FBI, and I want to also ask, if the unmasking that was ordered by the executive branch of government that took place shortly before the election, I'll say September, October 2016, and on throughout the transition period till the inauguration of, and even beyond perhaps, of President Trump, has any investigative committee in Congress had access to the full list of those unmasking requests, and how much of that is classified?
Congressman, I don't know what access committees have had to unmasking requests, specific committees. I'd be happy to have my staff take a look at that. I will say that unmasking requests get made not just by parts of the intelligence community, but by congressional committees themselves often ask for unmasking so that they can digest the information. A lot of times concerns, legitimate concerns about unmasking are really almost more about, to me, a problem that I take very seriously, which is leaks of information. And that's something that we have now a dedicated unit since I've taken over that's focused specifically on that. We've also recently issued a new media policy that clamps down and tightens up the rules about interaction with the media inside the FBI, and that's something that I think we take very, very, very seriously.
Well, I think I just say in conclusion, we know as much about the conversation on the Phoenix tarmac between President Clinton and Loretta Lynch as we do about the interview of Hillary Rodham Clinton within the FBI.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Cohen, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director Wray, we in Memphis have been blessed with good FBI agents, and I believe the FBI has an outstanding reputation, and it has, probably other than some flaws with J. Edgar Hoover, historically had a great reputation. In Memphis, I had a situation where there was a county employee named Mickey Wright who was murdered. The FBI worked on that case and saw to it that justice was found and he got a life sentence, and it was the FBI that did that. They recently arrested a man named Costello, Lorenzo Costello, and got him for 15 pounds of meth, which is the drug you ought to be looking at. Drugs like opioids and meth and crack and heroin, not so much cannabis, and $400,000, and had 10 people arrested and convicted. And they also got Larry Bates, who swindled a lot of people in church from out of millions and millions, I think $68 million, and got him 22 years in jail. So the FBI has done a great job. After the president said, which I disagree with, that the FBI was in tatters, Director Comey tweeted, I must let the American people know the truth. The FBI is honest, the FBI is strong, and the FBI is and always will be independent. Did you welcome his tweet, and do you agree with it?
Well, I believe that description of the FBI aligns with my own description. As my folks would tell you, I'm not really a Twitter guy. I've never tweeted, don't have any plans to tweet, and don't really engage in tweeting.
You've been at the FBI long enough to know the reputation of previous directors. What was the reputation of Director Comey within the agents of the FBI?
Well, my experience with Director Comey it was that when I worked with him, which was back in the early 2000s, was that he was a smart lawyer, a dedicated public servant, and somebody that I enjoyed working with. We haven't stayed in as much touch over the last several years, and of course, there's now the ongoing investigation, but my experiences have all been positive.
Do you know the reputation of Director Mueller within FBI agents and FBI lore?
My experience has been that Director Mueller is very well respected within the FBI.
When you were interviewed by President Trump, and you were interviewed by President Trump before you were appointed, is that not the case?
Yes, not exclusively, but yes.
What questions did he ask you?
My recollection is the conversations were more about my background, and in particular, we talked a lot about my desire to join the war on counterterror as somebody who had been in the Justice Department and in FBI headquarters on the day of 9/11 itself, and having met, I talked a lot about my interaction with the victims of 9/11 in my last law enforcement experience, and my desire to return to public service to keep people safe.
He didn't ask you any questions about Russia or about Mr. Comey or Mr. Mueller or any other questions like that at all?
No.
Good, very good. The FBI concentrates on situations that presently are a threat to the United States or to safety of the public. Is that correct?
Yes.
So the issues concerning the current president would be more important to you than the issues concerning the person who he defeated, who is now not in office. Would that be an accurate assessment?
Well, I'm reluctant to try to compare one matter to another in that way. What I would tell you is that we take any effort to interfere with our election very seriously. I take any effort to mishandle classified information very seriously.
Well, thank you. Benjamin Franklin said that he gave the American people a republic, if you can keep it. You are the heir to the legacy of Griffin Bell, having worked at King and Spalding, and you have an excellent reputation. If you can keep it, you will be tested. You will rise to the task, but you will be tested. I yield back the balance of my time.
Here, thanks, gentlemen. Recognize the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Director, was Agent Peter Strzok the former deputy head of counterintelligence at the FBI?
I don't remember his exact title, but I believe that's correct.
And he's the same Peter Strzok who was a key player in the Clinton investigation, the same Peter Strzok who interviewed Cheryl Mills, Huma Abedin, participated in the Clinton, Secretary Clinton's interview. And he's also the same Peter Strzok who now we know changed Director Comey's exoneration letter, changed the term gross negligence, which is a crime, to extreme carelessness. Is that the same guy?
Well, Congressman, I don't know every step that the individual you mentioned was involved in, but certainly I know that he was heavily involved in the Clinton email investigation.
Thank you. And is this the same Peter Strzok who helped, was a key player in the Russian investigation, and the same Peter Strzok who was put on Mueller's team, Special Counsel Bob Mueller's team?
I certainly know that he was working on the special counsel's investigation. Whether or not he would be characterized as a key player on that investigation, that's really not for me to say.
And the same Peter Strzok that we learned this past weekend was removed from the special counsel team because he exchanged text messages with a colleague at the FBI that displayed a pro-Clinton bias. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Talk about the same guy. Okay.
Yes.
Well, here's what I'm not getting. Peter Strzok is selected to be on Mueller's team after all this history, put on Mueller's team, and then he's removed for some pro-Clinton text messages. I mean, there are all kinds of people on Mueller's team who are pro-Clinton. There's been all kinds of stories. PolitiFact reported 96% of the top lawyers' contributions went to Clinton or Obama. But Peter Strzok, the guy who ran the Clinton investigation, interviewed Mills, Abedin, interviewed Secretary Clinton, changed gross negligence, a crime, to the term extreme carelessness, who ran the Russian investigation, who interviewed Mike Flynn, gets put on Mueller's team, and then he gets kicked off for a text message that's anti-Trump. If you kicked everybody off Mueller's team who was anti-Trump, I don't think there'd be anybody left. So here there's got to be something more here. It can't just be some text messages that show a pro-Clinton, anti-Trump bias. There's got to be something more. And I'm trying to figure out what it is. But my hunch is it has something to do with the dossier. Director, did Peter Strzok help produce and present the application to the FISA court to secure a warrant to spy on Americans associated with the Trump campaign?
Congressman, I'm not prepared to discuss anything about a FISA process in this setting.
We're not talking about what happened in the court. We're talking about what the FBI took to the court, the application. Did Peter Strzok, was he involved in taking that to the court?
I'm not going to discuss in this setting anything to do with the FISA court applications.
Well, let's remember a couple things, Director. And I know you know this. We've all been made aware of this in the last few weeks. Let's remember a couple things about the dossier. The Democrat National Committee and the Clinton campaign, which we now know were one and the same, paid the law firm, who paid Fusion GPS, who paid Christopher Steele, who then paid Russians, to put together a report that we call a dossier full of all kinds of fake news, National Enquirer garbage. And it's been reported that this dossier was all dressed up by the FBI, taken to the FISA court, and presented as a legitimate intelligence document, that it became the basis for granting a warrant to spy on Americans. And I'm wondering if that actually took place. It sure looks like it did. And the easiest way to clear it up is for you guys to tell us what was in that application and who took it there.
Congressman, our staffs have been having extensive interaction with both intelligence committees on our interaction with the FISA court, and I think that's the appropriate setting for those questions.
Here's what I think, Director Wray. I think Peter Strzok, head of counterintelligence at the FBI, Peter Strzok, the guy who ran the Clinton investigation, did all the interviews, Peter Strzok, the guy who was running the Russian investigation at the FBI, Peter Strzok, Mr. Super Agent at the FBI, I think he's the guy who took the application to the FISA court. And if that happened, I mean, think if this happened, if you had the FBI working with a campaign, the Democrats' campaign, taking opposition research, dressing it all up and turning it into an intelligence document and taking it to the FISA court so they could spy on the other campaign, if that happened, that is as wrong as it gets. And you know what? Maybe I'm wrong. You could clear it all up. You could clear it all up for all of us here, all the Congress who wants to know, and frankly, all of America who wants to know. You could clear it all up by release. We sent you a letter 2 days ago. Just release the application. Tell us what was in it. Tell us if I'm wrong. But I don't think I am. I think that's exactly what happened. And if it did, it is as wrong as it can be. And people who did that need to be held accountable.
Congressman, we will not hesitate to hold people accountable after there has been an appropriate investigation, independent and objective, by the Inspector General into the handling of the prior matter. And based on that, I will look at all available remedies, depending on what the facts are when they are found. As to the access to the dossier, that's something that is a subject of ongoing discussion between my staff and the various intelligence committees.
There's nothing prohibiting you, Director. Is there anything prohibiting you from showing this committee what was presented to the FISA court? The application you all put together at the FBI that was presented to the FISA court. Is there anything preventing you from showing us that?
The time of the gentleman has expired. The director can respond.
I do not believe that I can legally and appropriately share a FISA court submission with this committee.
I'm talking about what the FBI put together, not what the court had, what you took there, what was the process put together, what you presented, what you took to the court.
When I sign FISA applications, which I have to do almost every day of the week, they are all covered with a classified information cover. So that's part of why we would not be discussing it here. Is it likely that Peter Strzok played a part in the application presented to the FISA court?
The gentleman's time has expired. However, I do want to follow up on your last response to the gentleman. This committee, the House Judiciary Committee, has primary jurisdiction over the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. Yeah. So any request for documents coming to any part of the Congress should include the House Judiciary Committee, and if it is classified in any way, shape, or form, it can be provided to us in a classified setting. But that is information that we are very much interested in,
Mr. Chairman,
very much want to receive.
Just a question to the Chairman. Yeah, I don't think there's anything prohibiting the FBI from giving us what they used to put together what was taken to the FISA court. That's what we're asking for, and there is nothing prohibiting him from doing that.
I don't think there is either. The time of the gentleman has expired, however. You care to respond to that, Director Wray?
No, I think I've covered it.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Director Wray, you've led a distinguished career as an assistant U.S. attorney for the Northern District of Georgia, Atlanta. We're homeboys on that part. Justice Department Associate Deputy Attorney General, even serving as a Assistant Attorney General heading up the criminal division of the entire Justice Department, and then as a litigation partner at the international and premier law firm of King and Spalding. You headed up the...
Well, it was getting a little hot there in the House Intelligence Committee, as you heard Congressman Jim Jordan, Republican of Ohio, suggesting that Peter Strzok, the head of counterintelligence, the top counterintelligence agent in the FBI, might have gone to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance, or FISA, court, using material that was, in a sense, paid for by the Democrat National Committee, this so-called dossier to embarrass President Trump.
Yeah, and the FBI Director Wray obviously not conveying any information. That's not a surprise. However, some of the questions regarding the text messages, the anti-Trump sentiment, it was really interesting to hear him point out the fact that I think if you actually talk to anybody on Mueller's team, you're probably going to get the same sentiment. So why is his being treated any differently?
Julie Banderas, along with John Scott, for a truncated version of Happening Now today. Yes. Joining us is Josh Kraushar, politics editor for the National Journal. What did you think, Josh, of Jim Jordan's line of questioning there? Pretty interesting, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. Jim Jordan unleashed a pretty potent accusation, which is not only did Peter Strzok have some anti-Clinton texts, but he kind of was the point person in terms of authorizing surveillance against the Trump campaign. He really said that was a theory. He didn't have any evidence behind those allegations, but he really put Wray on the spot. And Wray, as he did throughout the hearing, deferred, ignored the question, and deferred a lot of these questions about that specific case of Peter Strzok to the Inspector General's investigation.
Yeah, his summary made some sense on the surface, or his supposition that Peter Strzok, had been involved in questioning Hillary Clinton aides Huma Abedin and Cheryl Mills. He had been involved in questioning Hillary Clinton herself. He had changed the language in Jim Comey's filing, taking it from grossly negligent to extremely careless. But then when he sends some anti-Trump text messages to a woman who was also working for the FBI, he was romantically involved with her, all of a sudden he gets booted from this Clinton investigation, and Jim Jordan says it doesn't necessarily pass the smell test.
Right. I mean, Republicans are arguing that there was a double standard between how the FBI handled the interviews with top Clinton officials and with how they handled the interview with Michael Flynn more recently. I mean, politics are mixed up with justice in this case. And, I mean, the big question, remember, during the 2016 campaign, Trump was largely supportive of the law enforcement agencies. A lot of Democrats were the ones criticizing the politicization of the FBI. So there are a whole lot of different threads. Peter Strzok is an important one, and I hope the FBI, and it sounds like Christopher Wray is going to, in the future, be transparent. This report from the Inspector General is going to come out. But Republicans were the ones, or rather Democrats were the ones accusing the FBI of politicization during the campaign. Now it's the Republicans' turn to have their chance.
And Wray is in a tight box here. I mean, the president appointed him to take over for the man the president fired, but the president has also been criticizing his agency pretty harshly of late.
That's right. I mean, this was a very awkward moment for Christopher Wray in his first hearing, his first testimony. He's trying to raise FBI morale at a time that President Trump is calling the agency as being in tatters, and you have Republicans hitting him for suspected politicization of some of their handlings of previous cases relating to this guy Peter Strzok. But Democrats are giving him a hard time because they want to make sure he's not overly loyal to President Trump, who appointed him to become FBI director. So he wasn't getting easy questioning on either side. Both Republicans and Democrats have reason to give him aggressive scrutiny.
Josh Kraushar, politics editor for the National Journal. Josh, thank you.
Thanks, John.
And so we've been continuing to watch this, and, a lot going on today, because not only this is happening, but we are actually getting more word on Al Franken. And news has actually come out that confirming, in fact, that he will be resigning today, which is another huge push against sexual allegations that have been made against a lot of politicians. But the Democrats certainly standing up and setting an example. 7
minutes away from the time when Al Franken is expected to take to the Senate floor. Julie says she has confirmation that he will resign as of late yesterday.
News just came in, yes.
His office was denying that after multiple allegations of sexual misconduct. We will have that for you live when it happens. A Fox News alert, and this could be the end of the Senate career of former comedian Al Franken, accused by at least 7 women of sexual harassment and, in some cases, worse. He is expected to go to the well of the Senate any minute now, and multiple reports now say that he will be announcing his resignation from the Senate. Let's go live to Peter Ducey. He's on Capitol Hill for us now. Peter?
And, John, we don't know yet, just a few minutes ahead of when Franken is supposed to take to the Senate floor to make this announcement, whether or not he's actually on the complex. There are big groups of cameras like this one everywhere, this one here at the entrance, the Senate carriage entrance. Again, we don't know if he snuck in through a different way or if he is on his way, if we're going to be able to catch him on the way in to get any more word, any more information about his thinking. But the senator has been hunkered down. Nobody wants to get ahead of him, so nobody will say for sure here on the Hill whether or not they know he is going to leave or if he is going to stay. Again, we think it might, as somebody is saying heads up, I don't know if that means that he's coming, maybe just not wanting to block the shot just in case. But still no word about Franken. He has not been back to Minnesota for quite a long time. Since these allegations all broke, he's been staying mostly at his daughter's house. So this is going to be the most, he did do a press availability here on the Hill last week or the week before, but this is going to be the most extensive, we believe, remarks that he has made. And again, if he decides to resign, it'll be a farewell address. If he decides that he's going to stay, that would be a surprise to a lot of people here. His Democratic colleagues yesterday were saying that they expect he is going to resign. They were saying that they think he's going to resign. They all want him to resign, more than 30 of them, but nobody knows for sure what is coming and what kind of detail we're going to get here, John.
36 of his fellow Democrats in the Senate have said that it is time for him to go. Among them, most of the female Democratic senators in the Senate have said that it's time for him to go. Our colleague Chris Stirewalt was on America's Newsroom this morning saying, pretty unusual to go to the well of the Senate.